long watch. The destroyer Welsiek drifted through the void, leaving behind the transport ships it had been escorting. Captain Sigibild stood beside the command throne, gazing out through the viewport. The Voxcaster echoed across the bridge. "Thank you, Welsiek, for your service. Be seeing you in 3 months," said the voice of Engineer Cognito Cogman, commander of the lead ore freighter the destroyer had been escorting. Sigibild cast a glance toward Garspek, his Vox officer, a wiry man with sharp eyes, if a touch cautious. Sigibild admired his efficiency, but there were moments, especially during the quieter intervals, when he suspected Garspek could see through him. The man had a way of looking up from the Vox controls with a faint, knowing smirk, one that suggested he could read between the lines, sensing Sigibild's unease. "Another update from engineering, sir?" Garspek's voice crackled slightly as he relayed the latest message, his hands already poised to send the next set of orders. Then there was Four, the navigation officer. Barely out of the academy, but already confident in her abilities, she maneuvered the ship with the precision of someone far more seasoned. Sigibild appreciated her skill, but sometimes wondered if she sensed his reluctance when issuing navigational commands. Four never showed hesitation, not in her work, nor when they faced warp disturbances or hostile encounters. Yet Sigibild feared he leaned on her too much, hiding his own uncertainties behind her quiet competence. Her unflinching focus only heightened the creeping sense that he didn't truly belong in the command seat. His gaze drifted to Captain Hjorewolf, who stood near the security detail. Young, brash, and still more at home in a brawl than his role as chief security officer, Hjorewolf had joined only a year ago, fresh from the academy. He was reliable in a crisis, even if his temper sometimes got the better of him. Sigibild couldn't help but see something of his younger self in the eager officer, a man too determined to prove himself in a galaxy that rarely cared. Hjorewolf's restlessness was something Sigibild occasionally envied. The lad didn't yet carry the weight of self-doubt. In his eyes, every fight was a test, every challenge a chance to earn his place. Bjornwolf, the sergeant-at-arms, was the opposite. He commanded the Land Wigathain contingent, a handful of ground troops that each ship was beginning to carry to bolster the small number of Void armsmen. Bjornwolf was calm, self-assured, a grounding presence. He seemed to carry little care, yet somehow cheered the crew even in the worst of times. One of the few who could ease tension just by being there. Of all the crew, it was Bjornwolf Sigibild suspected saw through him the most. Sigibild wrestled with the gnawing feeling that his rise through the ranks had come too swiftly. Did he truly deserve to command the Welsiek and its 9,000 souls? Or was he simply filling a void, waiting for the day someone realized he wasn't the leader they believed him to be? Yet despite these doubts, he knew one thing with certainty. He couldn't show weakness. Not to Garspek, not to Fear, and certainly not to Hjorewolf. The crew looked to him for guidance, and if he faltered, he would cast doubt over them all. So he stood tall, fingers drumming the hilt of his chainsword in rhythm with the silent tides of memory, waves of a past he could never quite escape. In the Wigathain barracks, 3 decks below where the aft cargo hold used to be, the air was warm and humming with low murmurs. The space was not as cramped as Bjornwolf had expected, far less confining than the muster hall aboard the Lufford, and certainly an improvement over the barracks of a civilian freighter. Compared to the stifling conditions on a Navis Astra Wigathain ship, it was practically luxurious. Bjornwolf, who had done most of his training on land, still shuddered at the memory of life at sea aboard an ironclad. He hadn't much liked the sea, but he found void travel remarkably comfortable. Most of the troops here hailed from the Greenwater Navy of NihtWyrtha. Sinwolf, his old friend, seemed to treat it all as an adventure. Bjornwolf wasn't quite so cheerful about it, but he shared the sentiment deep down. The decision to join the Navis Astra Wigathain hadn't come easily. He had seen the threats looming over his world, and it seemed better to meet them out here, beyond NihtWyrtha's sky, than to wait for them to reach his doorstep. And truthfully, he owed something to Yuna and to Tiberius. The look on the Drukari's face hadn't hurt either. So here he was, serving in the Navy, still trying to piece together what was really going on. He thought he knew some of it, but there was a tangled web around his world that needed unraveling. Only then could he set down his Seeks and Serpenta on the mantelpiece and relax by his own hearth. The red Leothnit lumens flickered on overhead. Beornwulf glanced up. Another drill? Likely. Captain Hjorwulf was fond of catching them off guard. Hjorwulf had drilled them relentlessly, leaving no room for complacency. They'd run the length of the ship in pitch darkness, tripped over unseen wires, crawled through ducts, dodged tripping lasers. Navigating the endless obstacles the captain devised had become routine. Beornwulf both loathed and respected it. The two men had reached an understanding, but it was more a truce than an end to hostilities. Beornwulf guessed this drill would have them crossing the launch bay again, trying to avoid triggering the Vox listeners. Hjorwulf had a knack for finding creative ways to break them. Each squad was expected to simulate close combat with electro rods, and Hjorwulf never missed an opportunity to keep them moving, alert, and tightly bound as a unit, no matter the exhaustion in their bones. It was grueling, unforgiving, and exactly what they needed. Beornwulf's lips twisted into a faint grin. He remembered how the shuttle pilots of the Navis Astra Wigathain, stationed near the launch bay, would place bets on squad performances. They found endless amusement in watching the squads trip the servitor alarms and get sent back to the start. Nearby, the soft binaric chants of the tech priests drifted through the air as they blessed the machine spirits within each suit. The Wigathan warriors barely acknowledged them, occasionally moving a priest out of the way with a grunt or nod. Beornwulf stood behind his own armor, watching as the rites were completed. He removed his tunic, his eyes lingering for a moment on the two long scars that crossed his chest. He pushed the memory aside. Reaching up, he removed the warrior ring from around his neck, suspended from a Mechanicus-forged chain. He held it a moment, then passed it to the squad servitor, who hung it from the gorget of his suit. The captain's voice rang through the ship-wide Vox, prompting them to make ready. Beornwulf grabbed the winch handles and pulled himself up. He slid his legs into the suit, slotted his augmented arm into its socket, and nodded to the priest. With a final intonation of praise to the Omnissiah, the helm slammed shut. 2 hours later, after sprinting the length of the ship twice through the lower access corridors, Beornwulf was genuinely considering whether he might one day run out his term of service, return to his family hold, and settle down. Maybe raise a pet warg, take a bride. Well, maybe not the warg. The Welsiacs translated back into real space after the short jump to the waypoint, a third of the way along the Queensway transit route. Here was a stable point, not unlike the Silver Expanse, the next waypoint further up the run. A binary system of dull red stars lit the space around them in rust-hued twilight, outliers of the Rust Belt, which looped around the northern reaches of the Arcana Inclusium like an iron crown. This place, known as Radseaster, served as a stop-off for trade ships moving along the Queen's Way. It was also the closest point on the route to Forge World Grimness space, and frequently used by merchants from that grim forge to travel deeper into the Inclusium. Garspec flicked the Vox open and spoke clearly. Radseaster Station, this is Welsiacs, scheduled to pick up Convoy 09 Cog Tiberius. Captain Sigabield, still leaning beside his command throne, found the naming conventions faintly amusing. 09 meant it was the 9th convoy. Cog, Mechanicus, obviously, and Tiberius because the convoy was sponsored by Magos Doctora Cogitatus Tiberius himself, all very literal. He tapped the hilt of his chainsword idly as he waited for a reply. Then the Vox crackled again, this time with a stilted binaric tone, clearly a servitor on the other end. Be advised, Z9CT has not arrived. It is 2 days overdue. Siggebield frowned. Delays weren't unheard of. It was the Arcana Inclusium, after all, not exactly a reliable corridor. But no astropathic transmission? No signal of delay? That was different. He turned toward the astropath's chamber and sent for the ship's resident soul reader. A moment later, the wizened psyker arrived on the bridge. Cloaked in threadbare robes with hollow black eyes, the man walked slowly, his staff tapping out a slow beat on the metal floor. Contact Fiskbala, Sigabield said. See if they've had any communication from the convoy. The astropath bowed his head slowly. As you wish, my lord. The old astropath bent his head as he reached into the warp, his mind casting out across the immaterium like a flickering signal lantern in a storm. The shadows of unreality curled around his thoughts, searching, feeling, until at last he found what he sought. Another mind, receptive, familiar, the astropath assigned to Tiberius. The two psychers touched minds for only a moment, thoughts intermingling in a brief communion of images and sensation. Then, with the faintest trace of a smile, the old man raised his staff and turned toward the bridge. "My lord," he said, "Tiberius will inform you himself." Sigibild opened his mouth to speak, but was cut off by Fear's voice. Translation point opening. It's a big one. He stepped quickly to the viewport. A blinding flash tore across the void, and through the widening rip in reality, the massive silhouette of a Mechanicus vessel began to emerge, its surface glinting with crimson runes and vox prayers. The Questa revelation. Sigibild inhaled sharply. So much for routine. In the twisting, rolling waves of the warp, a mind floated, like a glass bottle adrift on a dark ocean. It held a single idea, delicate and sealed within. The bottle bobbed, rising and falling with the warp's invisible tides, caught in lulls, tugged by unseen currents. The astropath, old and worn thin by decades of communion, loosed his vision with the casualness of long repetition. The thought went out, and before it reached its destination, two minds caught it. Not one, two. They turned their attention upon it. The bottle shuddered in response. Noticed, touched. Then, empty now, the idea gone, it continued to float, hollow. Baelgor snapped open his eyes and immediately stood, too fast. It was a mistake. The synthale was a little too strong, and his post-human physiology had long given up processing toxins. Like the rest of him, it barely worked anymore. He ignored the swaying of the deck and pushed past a cultist who scowled at him. Further down the hall, two Drakari were arguing over a shipment of salt. He slipped between them, stepped over a leaking pipe, and burst through onto the bridge of the station. He raised a finger, or maybe two. His hand. That would do. "My lord," he slurred, "the Mechanicus have sent a ship. They're looking for your bounty." Lord Jodaran didn't glance up at first. He was seated, inspecting an augmetic hand, golden fingers spread wide. With a nod to the merchant standing nearby, he said, "I'll take this one." To his second, he added, "Pay the thing." The hunched trader bowed, or at least tilted the hood hiding its face, and passed the chosen relic to an aide as it followed for payment. Jodaran rose to his full height. His armor, a vile fusion of gold and pink, shimmered with unnatural slime. Turning to Baelgor, he sneered, "Are you seeing visions in the immaterium, sorcerer, or simply the ones in your head, gifts from your god of excess?" Baelgor tried to stand straighter. "A Mechanicus ship approaches," he said, "and one from the fishbowl." Jodaran barked a laugh. "A machine barge and a ship of barbarians. You bore me. Go away." Baelgor hesitated, then looked again into the warp. There, yes, he saw it. The barbarian ship. It glowed, faintly, not like a normal soul light, but like it existed partially apart from the warp itself. Its crew were wrong, like shadows. There was distance between them and the warp, as though they weren't fully present. He'd seen that before, in the prisoners taken from the convoy. He had tried to warn them then. These people, these things, were half in and half out. Dangerous. And now he saw something else. The ship was tracing the path the raiders had used. No. Could it be? Then, something turned. Eyes. Minds. Watching him. Peering from behind a sheet of ice. They were far, but they saw him. Baelgor recoiled. "Lord, they are following the warp trail. They are coming here." Jodaran slammed a hand down onto the console beside him. It had been broken for years. It did not spark. "Then we will have more prisoners to sell," he growled. "Now I told you to get out of my sight, you worthless mollusk." Baelgor jumped, nearly saluted, then staggered off the bridge the way he had come. He hated this place, hated this warband, always talked down to him, always scorned his talents, treated like a spare voxman. Just because he didn't have a demonic mouth growing out of his back. He spotted the two Drakari from earlier, now with blades drawn, mid-argument. Baelgor placed a heavy, half-armored gauntlet on each of their shoulders. "Gentlemen, either of you looking for a sorcerer? I offer reasonable rates, and I sleep a lot, so you barely have to feed me." The two Xenos paused, considered, and holstered their blades. Wordlessly, they led the disgruntled sorcerer away. From a nearby corridor, another figure emerged. A woman, lean and silent, with tribal tattoos across her face and a half-faded Astartes chapter serf's armor in faded orange. She watched the three men disappear, shrugged, and followed the word-bearer. On the bridge, Jodaran was seated again. A Mechanicus apothecary attendant was affixing the new augmetic hand, tightening seals with clattering precision. Jodaran glanced up as two newcomers approached. One wore the colors of the 17th Legion. The other, a human, tribal tattoos inked across her face, stood just behind. "Is there a reason?" Jodaran drawled. "You've scrubbed my floors with your presence?" Valkaron bowed. "Why, yes, Lord, I come with news." Jodaran picked at one of the raised welts on his cheek. "Don't tell me. There's a great opportunity to join a new crusade, and you've come to invite my warband to die heroically alongside your master." Valkaron blinked. No. That's not for another century." Valkaron gave a low bow, his chains and charms rustling softly. "There is a ship of the Navis Astra Wigathain and another from Fiskbala Station en route," he said, "commanded by the Stonehand and General Tiberius, the hero of the Orc War." Jodaran sat up slowly, the augmetic hand not yet attached hanging at an awkward angle. "The what and the who?" Valkaron bowed again. "The Drukhari captured a merchant ship yesterday. The crew bought their lives with news that these two ships are looking for this station." Jodaran rose to his full height, the unfastened hand dangling from its socket. "These do not seem a threat," he said imperiously. He held up his working hand. "Have you seen what I have here? They don't stand a chance." Valkaron bowed even lower. "The news is given in honesty. A fool may ignore it, or treat it as a valued commodity. Either way, I have completed my task." Jodaran let the Dark Mechanicus attach his new hand as he reclined on the throne. "And you have delivered it, bearer of the gods' words. What boon do you wish in payment? A ship of gold? A barge of trinkets?" Valkaron straightened. "I offer my services." Jodaran flexed his new hand. It was a fine piece of work. "A priest of the gods?" He looked Valkaron over appraisingly. "Far be it from me to stand between a preacher and his gods. The Hollow Crown station is yours to preach." He reached for his daemon weapon, a fluted, organ-like cannon forged by a god with an unfortunate fondness for music. As he swept his gaze across the bridge, his voice thundered. "Make ready for battle. Post guards on all decks. Whip the macro crews to their stations, and prepare the fleet to deploy." Then he turned back to the word-bearer. "How are you at summoning me a daemon horde?" Valkaron gave one last bow. "You never said how many," he replied, and walked away. His staff rang against the metal floor as he withdrew an ancient book, the tattooed woman at his side following without a word. In the lower halls of the Hollow Crown, a Xenos in a filthy cloak and stitched hood limped up to the guards outside the prison pens. It held a tray of trinkets. The guards barely glanced up. One plucked a data charm from the pile, another exchanged some creds. They paid no further attention as the hunched traitor ambled down onto the prison deck. Skitari Alpha Braylon sat slumped against a rusting wall. She looked up at the bundled figure. The other Skitari stirred too, each of them scarred and battered. The ambush by the traitor cultists had been swift, and the creatures they'd brought were not of flesh. Across the corridor, the wounded of the Navis Astra Wigathain lay in a second cell, just as damaged, just as forgotten. Braylon tried to sit up, not easily. The guards had taken her augmetic arm as a trophy, nailed it over the hatch to their bridge like a hunting prize. The traitor shuffled close. As it passed, a gloved hand darted from its rags and placed a small device into Braylon's open palm. She clutched it instinctively. Then it moved to the Wigathan cell. Another device slipped into the hand of Tunbald. The traitor paused before Cuthelm. The seer had tried to scan its mind. A face of rough cloth turned to meet him. It nodded once. Cuthelm blinked. The thought entered his mind. A message, telepathic, quiet but sure. The Quester revelation and Walsiax are coming. Cuthelm moved to Tunbald's side. The device was still in the soldier's hand, a monofilament blade ring. Outside the station, the Drukhari ship detached and began to maneuver away from the Hollow Crown. The pirate captain had seen the approaching threat and decided his allegiance was negotiable. If no one was going to listen to him, why bother? He didn't even remember Jodaran's name. A small shuttle on the station's lower side detached too, moving in the opposite direction. Baelgor watched it through the viewport, half slumped in a chair, hugging a synthol bottle. He blinked, frowning. That wasn't a pirate shuttle. That was a Harlequin craft. He sipped his drink. Huh. He leaned back and hugged the bottle tighter. He still had one left. That was what mattered. Out in the warp, Magos Ductora Cogitatis. Tiberius looked resplendent in his battle armor, ceremonial robes hanging from his shoulders like banners of rust and gold. His gloved hands swept over the projected star map. On it, the hollow crown was marked as an old, abandoned imperial fueling station, long forsaken by grimness, even before Archmagos Sensarax Centauri's rise to power. The Quester revelation will translate in at the closest stable jump point, he said, voice echoing with cogitator-assisted gravity. That will give us 2 hours under full power, sufficient for an element of surprise. The Walsiax will run ahead. He tapped the coordinates. We launched torpedoes carrying cogitators seeded with scrap code, designed to confuse local defense systems. While they respond, we board the station en masse with Skitarii, while the Quester Revelation and Walsiax keep their ships engaged. He stepped back and stood to full height, satisfied. Auspex Adept Carson Volks nodded, arms crossed in satisfaction. It had mostly been his plan. Chaplain Wolfgar gave a solemn nod. Captain Sigibald looked wary, but gave a short nod of assent. Heorowulf offered a crisp salute. Brother Nathaniel twisted the fingers of his augmetic hand without comment. Osric stared ahead blankly, possibly daydreaming. Bjornwolf, leaning against the wall, took a bite from a nutrient bar, far better than the ones aboard the destroyer. He nodded along with the rest of the Welsiax crew. Good plan, he said dryly. Some of us might even survive. Tiberius narrowed his augmetic eye at him. Several others turned to look as well. Bornwolf looked up, halfway through chewing. What? Volks leaned forward, gears in his neck clicking. Have you a better plan than the Magos? Sigibild suppressed a smirk. Heorowulf rolled his eyes. Osric grinned. He probably was thinking of something else. Bjornwolf calmly placed down the half-eaten bar. Slowly, deliberately, he unscrewed his water flask, took a drink, and returned it to his pouch. Then he stepped forward, pointing to the star. We jump in 8 light minutes behind the star. At that range, they won't detect us re-entering real space. He pointed to Bjorthelm, the ship's void navigator. Wigathain void jump, tight and low. It's a long shot, so we'll be on low power and dark running until we close. He tapped the star again. We hit their ships before they launch. Fast, decisive. Tiberius, take the macro deck. It'll be the most defended. Wolfgar, you hit the bridge and command nodes. The Wigathain strike squads push up through the station from the outer docks. He smiled. We meet in the middle for nutrient bars and ale. Silence. Even the servitors hesitated. Wolfgar made a subtle hand motion, likely the start of a dramatic oath, but Osric stopped him with a raised finger. Tiberius ran the numbers. It was better. Margins were tighter, but the tactical advantage was undeniable. He nodded. So be it. He just hoped he wasn't going to regret it. The descent. It was quiet. Out in the void, there was no sound. No engine rumble, no chatter, just the slow drift of bodies and hull across the emptiness. The Welsiax had cut its engines days ago. The Wigathan strike team stood locked to its hull in silence, detached, still. Once clear of detection range, they had entered Unquilm Slup, activating their Susan membrane in their armor locked in their void suits. They drifted, dead and dreaming, carried only by inertia. Gravity pulled them now, a slow arc from behind the star, falling sunward toward the hollow crown. 2 days passed. Then, without ceremony, automated stimulants hissed to life in their suits. One by one, the warriors stirred, awakened, blinking into their helmet displays. The station was now visible, a tiny ring against the star glow. Dozens of docked vessels clung to it like parasites, some of them miles long, now appearing no larger than scattered splinters of metal, shimmering in reflected light. "What king?" asked Bjorthelm suddenly. "What?" Heorowulf's voice crackled back. "The king?" Bjorthelm repeated, his voice distant. "It's called the Hollow Crown." "Whose crown? Did Grimness have kings back then?" Bjornwolf answered. "Not that sort of crown. It's the crown of a human skull, hollow because someone put a bolter round through it." Bjorthelm was quiet for a moment. "Why?" Bornwolf checked his air supply. His voice was low, the tone of an old tale told too often. Long ago, before the Imperium came to NihtWyrtha, this place was just a fueling station, run entirely by servitors. There was a traitor Magos once, tried a rebellion on Grimness, asked the Dark Mechanicus for immortality. He paused. So they gave it to him, took his head, put it in a robot body. He went mad and domed himself. Silence. Bjornwolf continued. Story goes he survived somehow. The old Archmagos had his skull turned into a servo skull and left it in charge of maintenance. Gave him his immortality, after all. Bjorthum said nothing. The void was very quiet again. Then Heorwolf broke it. Make ready. The station was much larger now, a looming shape, half-built, half-corrupted, metal teeth gnawed by time and neglect. The drifting warriors broke formation. Each cluster burst apart with tiny jets of course correction. They fanned out in silence. Any who misjudged would simply fall back into Unquilm Slup, their suits locking again as they awaited pickup, or drifted off to become another satellite around the station's rusting hull. Bjornwolf watched the others scatter, then adjusted his trajectory. A small light blinked green inside his helmet. The breach point was coming up fast. He whispered to no one. Let's see if the old skull is still watching. Navigator Ingusor washed his hands in the bowl of clear water and turned to the servitor holding the towel. Drying his hands with precise, priestly grace, he brushed down his long robes. His third eye blinked. He smiled. He really didn't understand what all the fuss was about. There were rumors of an attack incoming, yes, but he didn't see why his ship had to be involved. It certainly wasn't fit for combat. Nevertheless, his pirate clan was rushing around, grabbing weapons and yelling about making their god proud. Ingusor wasn't entirely sure which god that was at the moment. He'd noticed fewer scrolls and crescent moons scratched into the walls lately, and a complete lack of feather adornments. In their place, more pink. Definitely more pink. He suspected they were Slaaneshi now. He passed an outer airlock leading to his navigator sphere. Unlocked. Strange. Normally the hatches were sealed. He touched the ring of the locking mechanism. It moved loosely. Ah, he thought, broken lock. That explains it. No doubt the engine seer would come repair it, eventually. Though he vaguely remembered that particular engine seer being chained to the outer hull last week. Or was that someone else? He didn't really pay attention to internal ship politics. Arriving at the navigator throne, he sat carefully, robes flowing around the curved seat. He doubted his services would be needed. After all, the enemy were coming to them. But perhaps, if retreat became necessary, he would suddenly become very important. He did know every backpath the pirates used through the Inclusium, had them all mapped out in his mind's eye. He was quite proud of that, and pleased his contributions were so appreciated. He picked up the latest copy of the Trinova Times, flipping to page 2. His eyes, all three, went wide. The stalker of Trinova strikes again. He checked the chronometer. The paper was less than a week old. He shook his head. Disgraceful, he thought. Look at the galaxy these days, falling apart. No one knows how to live in an ordered society anymore. A glint caught his eye. He looked down. A silver egg-shaped object rested on the perfectly polished deck. He frowned. Had the cleaner left it behind? He reached down to touch it. He never got the chance. The cryo-grenade detonated before his fingers made contact. Within half a second, he and his entire chamber were frozen solid in a glistening sheath of ice. One hand still outstretched toward the device, a faint look of indignant curiosity frozen on his face. Ritual and ruin. The decks of the Hollow Crown stank of oil, blood, and ozone. Candles flickered in warp-tainted air, their flames casting shivering shadows on rust-stained walls. The chanting had reached its final cadence. Valkaron stood at the center of the summoning circle, arms outstretched, his black and red armor ringing with the toll of chimes crafted from mortal bone. His voice thundered through the ritual chamber, layered and doubled by demonic echoes. Behind him stood Sorny Nayevna, his personal pilot and silent guardian, tall, pale-skinned, and clad in half-armor, half-flight leathers. Her face was hidden beneath tribal tattoos of her home world. Around them stood two hunched cultists, sworn to him through blood pacts and mad devotion. Their job was to protect him while he summoned destruction. The circle flared. A shriek split the air, not of sound but thought, and reality bled. Daemons poured forth. Warp flame erupted as pink and red horrors tumbled into being, twisting, screaming, clawing at the air. Clawed limbs lashed out, some taking shape as blades, others simply writhing. The summoning was successful. Entirely successful. Maybe too successful? Because then, a different daemon appeared. Not summoned. Not shaped by his will. Cenarion smiled, her form shimmered as she stepped out of a stream of water cascading from a broken pipe. Tall, beautiful, terrible figure wrapped in veils of flowing light and void shadow. She stepped from the warp breach like she had always been there, her presence stilling the lesser daemons around her who backed off from her. They snarled, but retreated, cowed by her gaze. They seemed confused by her presence. It was cheating, and Cenarion knew it. These were not her creatures, but belonged to a different god, one she had little time for now. She had felt the ritual, calling the gathering warp spawn, and decided to step through. Normally she would whisper in a mind, but now she showed herself, stepping delicately along the dirt-covered grating, red grass sprouting where she passed. Valkyron blinked, confused. He took an involuntary step back. "I did not call you," he said, hand reaching slowly for the tome at his side. Cenarion tilted her head. "No, little man, but I did summon you." Her voice came soft but sharp. She turned, not waiting to see if he obeyed. Valkyron glanced at Sorny, who nodded once. Without speaking, they followed her through the demonic riot. Two cultists, Dagvar and Moyle, kept pace, blades drawn. They had been ordered to keep an eye on the new arrival and did not feel like remaining in a deck full of warp spawn. They passed through decks in chaos, fires burning, corrupted servitors lurching, demons fighting among themselves as they looked for more real prey. Cenarion stopped at a sealed chamber. 4 cryopods lined the wall, unmarked, humming softly. One of them pulsed with a violet glow. Valkyron stepped forward, about to ask, but she really did not have time for conversation. Pushing him in one of the pods, the cold hit him as he protested. Cenarion raised a single finger, and with that simple gesture, the word-bearer froze into a block of ice. The temperature dropped instantly in the rest of the small room. Frost crept along the deck. The 2 cultists made a half-heated salute and jumped into 2 of the remaining pods as ice covered them. Sorny still had her pistol in her hand. Events were moving too fast for her, but with a smile and a nod from the daemon, she too climbed into the last pod, after one last look at her master. She too froze, flash frozen in a mist of silvered vapor. Her breath caught, his limbs stiffened, her thoughts slowed. The last thing she saw was Cenarion gazing into the middle distance, a faint smile on her lips. As if standing over them, guarding them, why was the Neverborn protecting them? Then blackness of cryosleep took her mind. Elsewhere a door blew inward. A hull breach alarm screamed. The bulkhead exploded as Magos Ductora Cogitatus Tiberius walked in his refractor field flaring, clad in his full warplate, surrounded by his wargs. Behind came his Skitarii shock troops, who formed a firing line, boarding shields in front. The deck became a war zone in seconds. Serpentis blasted plasma. Spears of red energy lashed through the warp-born. The wargs, howling, plunged into the demonic mass like blades through flesh. Tiberius raised his arm and fired the Sildathnidal. Each thought struck like a concentrated exorcism. Daemons screamed and evaporated, clawing at their flesh as it boiled and dissolved, drawn back into the warp, clawing at the metal gratings and walls trying to resist. One larger beast managed to roar before its entire form folded in on itself, imploding in a spiral of unreality. Skirmishing Skitarii followed in disciplined lines, purging the remaining daemons with walls of plasma fire. The few cultists went almost unnoticed, most dropping weapons and running, some caught by plasma fire, others cornered by the daemons who were summoned to fight alongside them. Within minutes, the deck was cleared. Smoke hissed from the floor. Demonic ichor dripped and steamed. Tiberius issued orders to press forward. The Skitarii marched on in lockstep, the wargs howling as they hunted. Occasionally the howl was followed by a scream as a hiding cultist was discovered. The assault moved deeper into the hollow crown, and in that frozen chamber, untouched by fire or fury, 4 lives were preserved on ice, unnoticed. The bridge of the hollow crown was a din of alarms, flashing lumens and orders been sent. Out beyond the station, Lord Jadaran could see one of the pirate ships belonging to the Purple Raider clan been pounded by his own station's macro cannon. "What is wrong with those fools?" he shouted to anyone listening. The bulkhead doors to the command deck blew inward with a thunderous crack. Smoke and debris flooded the corridor as Chaplain Wulfgar stormed through, his Crozius Arcanum already humming with pent-up power. Behind him, Tech Marine Osric advanced with measured steps, servo arms twitching, and Apothecary Nathaniel followed, calmly drawing his bolt pistol. Two more Iron Hands battle brothers moved in formation, weapons ready. The dark Mechanicum Acolyte made a screeching sound and fled in the direction of the opposite hatch. Jodaran shot him in the back with Songmaker. The man fell into several perfectly slices pieces. "Coward!" he shouted, then turned on the Space Marines. Wulfgar Rook in a sharp breath. He was a seasoned veteran, but the command deck was a warped cathedral of rust and excess. Once an imperial bridge, now mutated into a blasphemous shrine. The control dais had been reshaped into an altar of flesh metal, and at its center stood Lord Jodaran, twisted warlord of the Hollow Crown. He appeared to be shooting his own men. His armor shimmered with oily hues, gold and pink light oozing off it in pulsing waves. His right hand held his weapon of pride, the organ-shaped daemon gun, formed of brass tubes and screaming mouths, pipes protruding from a spinal-like frame turned on his squad. It wailed a chord as he pulled the trigger. The room vibrated with music. Not just notes, not just sound. Agony, too. The two Iron Hands battle brothers staggered forward, then collapsed mid-step, their armor cut into sections like slicing through soft meat. Wulfgar roared and charged. He blocked a second burst of sonic fire with his Crozius, its energy field flaring as the hymnal shriek collided with pure faith. He leapt onto the dais. Jodaran raised Songmaker again. He never got the chance. Wulfgar brought his Crozius down in a thunderous arc, crushing the warlord's mutated chest and snapping his spine in two. With a final choked gasp, Jodaran crumpled. His song ended. Behind him, Osric fired a burst of plasma into a charging Chaos Astartes, cutting the traitor in half. Nathaniel moved with surgical precision, his chainsword buzzing as it severed another heretic's limbs in a spray of blackened blood. The command deck fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the victors. Brother Nathaniel removed the gene seed from the fallen as Osric looked out of the viewport. Was using the station's own guns part of the plan? If so, it was a god part, he said. Wulfgar stepped to the viewing port, wiping blood from his gauntlet across the cracked glass. Outside, the station's gunnery now turned on a light destroyer, blasting its hull as it turned, its void shield filtered, unable to activate from a carefully removed bolt or two. The Welsiacs unleashed a final torpedo salvo. One of the Chaos destroyers turned to flee, but its engine core bloomed into fire as the torpedo struck home. The vessel broke in two, then vanished in a ripple of silent explosions. Wulfgar narrowed his eyes. Some ships were running, he smiled inside his skull mask. Their navigator spheres, every one, had been frozen in coordinated sabotage. Cryo devices likely planted by the saboteurs. The heretics were trapped, blind to the warp. A heartbeat later, the gun decks on 3 Chaos frigates erupted from the inside. Fire poured from the hulls as sabotage protocols triggered. Power systems detonated in cascades of internal collapse. The battle was being won. His vox crackled. Wulfgar opened a channel to the Questor revelation. Engine Seer Auspex Adept Carson Volks, this is Chaplain Wulfgar. The command deck is secure. Lord Jodaran is dead. Static. Then, confirmed, praise the Omnissiah, came the reply, cool and sharp. Your timing is elegant. The revelation has crippled a Chaos frigate, targeting solutions prepared for the next. Wulfgar nodded. Outside, the vast Mechanicus vessel loosed a glowing lance of energy from its prow. It carved through the fleeing frigate like a blade through parchment, tearing the enemy in two, a fitting end to a corrupted fleet. Wulfgar turned to Osric and Nathaniel. It is done, he said. Osric was missing. Wulfgar shook his head. Come on, better keep an eye on him. Nathaniel nodded. I suppose we had. He looked down at the demonic weapon that had taken his brothers. It had tentacles for grips. He shook his head. The universe had gone mad. He followed Wulfgar, and the sounds of screaming and a space marine laughing. On the lower decks, the sounds of the macro cannon fire thundered through the tunnel like passages. Bjornwolf ducked low, bolt pistol raised, as a cultist fired wildly from behind a slagged console. Hjorwolf stepped out into the open, calmly raised his carbine, and dropped the heretic with a single shot. Still breathing? Bjornwolf asked, sidestepping the steaming corpse. No one worth talking to, Hjorwolf replied. Gun decks just ahead! They moved forward, boots echoing on scorched metal. Smoke curled in the halls. Streaks of blood and burnt scripture marked the walls, the last vestiges of the cult's desperate stand. The sounds of battle had dwindled now to distant bursts and the low whum of the Mechanicus siege cannons outside. But inside, something else rumbled, a pulse of heavy artillery from within the station. They rounded the final corridor and stopped. The gun deck was alive. The main deck guns, great siege cannons built into the bones of the Hollow Crown, were firing again and again, pounding the remnants of the Chaos fleet. Steam hissed from cooling vents, muzzle flash bathed the deck in firelight, and at the firing controls stood the last people either of them expected. Tunbald, Braylon, and several other prisoners, wounded, weary, but determined. They'd broken out, reclaimed the deck, were firing the weapons themselves. Bjornwolf grinned. Braylon turned, and when she saw him, her eyes widened. She stepped forward, her remaining arm outstretched. "You came." Bjornwolf raised an eyebrow. "You only have one arm." She hugged him with it anyway. He returned the embrace, then patted her on the back and pulled away. "Found your other one," he said casually, reaching into his satchel and producing the battered augmetic arm. "Was nailed above a doorway in a Chaos frigate I planted charges on. Thought it looked familiar." Braylon snorted, then wiped her face with the back of her hand. "What happened?" he asked. She shook her head. "Long story." Then she stepped forward and kissed him on the cheek. He blinked. "Huh." Tunbald gave a tired laugh as he reloaded the ammo conveyor. "She's had that plan since the cell block." Before Bjornwolf could reply, heavy footfalls echoed behind them. Osric emerged through the smoke, his armor dented and blackened, one of his servo arms sparking behind him. "You will not believe what I just did," he said, panting. 4 Chaos Space Marines. One of them had a tail." Everyone turned to stare. Not one of those little stinger things either. Full-on tail, like a spine whip. He stopped as he realized no one looked particularly impressed. "You didn't even see it," Osric muttered. "Could have happened." Bjornwolf smirked and tossed him a canteen. "We believe you." He lied. Osric drank, muttering to himself. "You lose one servo arm and nobody respects your war stories anymore." He saw Braylon's injury. "Leg, you lose one servo leg." He changed his mind. Horrorwolf looked around the deck. "Where is Cuthhelm?" Tunbald pointed along the outer promenade. "Following a hunch," he said. Braylon wiped the grime from her forehead. "We've got enough charge in the cannon for one more salvo. After that..." Bjornwolf looked out through the gun deck viewport. Wreckage drifted across the void. Flaming hulls, shattered spires, broken symbols of fallen glory. "I don't think there is anything left to fire at," he said. Cuthhelm moved silently through the lower passageways, the shadows seeming to breathe around him. He passed rows of intact escape pods, each one sealed and ready, but empty. If anyone had made their way down here, he reasoned, they'd have taken a pod, but there was no sign of anyone, not even blood. He reached out with his mind. Above on the upper decks, he sensed the last dying ripples of demonic presence. One or two flickers, then silence. One or two more, then gone, fading like embers in ash. He turned a corner and came to an exterior hatch. He paused, scanning the corridor. Still nothing. Off in the distance, a shape slipped into shadow. He froze. Without hesitation, Cuthhelm summoned an ice spike to his hand. With the null bracelet gone from his neck, his powers had returned. He had not enjoyed being only human. He reached out toward the shadows, only to find them hollow. No mind, no presence. He looked around the corner. Just darkness. Then, in the reflection of a black viewport behind him, he saw her. A face. Pale. Watching. "Not yet," she said. Then she was gone. Back into the warp. He spun around. The viewport showed only a burning hulk drifting silently outside the station. Then he saw it, a mark on the wall just beside the outer docking hatch. Footsteps echoed behind him. He turned to see Bjornwolf and Horrorwolf approaching, weapons raised, moving cautiously. He gave them a short nod. "No one here." They holstered their weapons. Cuthhelm tapped the wall near the hatch and stepped back. Horrorwolf peered at it. "A rune?" Bjornwolf stepped closer. He took a breath and reached into his pouch, producing the monofilament blade ring Tunbald had handed him earlier, the escape tool given by a Xenos in rags. He looked again at the wall, a delicate curved mark, an Eldari glyph. Horrorwolf frowned. "What is it?" Bjornwolf answered, voice low. A harlequin passed this way. Hjorwolf stared. Why would a harlequin help our men escape? Bjornwolf rubbed his chin. I doubt it was out of kindness, but harlequins, they like fair play. He looked at the captain, more serious now. I think it's time NihtWyrtha started taking the galaxy more seriously. Hjorwolf folded his arms. We don't have the men. Bjornwolf gave a lopsided smile. We will, if the Wigathain truly join the Navis Astra Wigathain. I have a feeling people are about to start noticing our out-of-the-way little fishbowl. Hjorwolf said nothing. He just looked at the glyph, then back toward the upper decks. Together the three men turned and began walking back toward the fading sounds of gunfire, the final shots of a battle nearly won, and the first steps toward a wider war.